Chapter 7, Section 3, Feudalism and the Manor Economy. So by the end of this section, the things that you should be able to do is explain how feudalism shaped medieval society, describe the life of knights and nobles, and analyze how the economic system of the manor worked and how it affected both peasants and nobles. So one of the things to kind of be focusing on, I know some of you struggle maybe with how to put things into your own words, how to pick out the meaning of words. Using context to determine meaning is one of the most important things you can do, is look for those clues that will help you decide what that word means. So when a word pops up that you don't know, use the things before it and the things after it to try and decide what is it that it means. So for example, unify. In the sentence, Charlemagne strove to unify his kingdom. He regarded education as one of the ways to bring the European peoples together. So the clue here is bring European peoples together. And so we start to figure out that maybe it means uniting, combining, going from many into one. When you go through the key vocab words, terms, and people, I have some here that are important to this section. Here are the rough definitions, and I tried to put those somewhat into my own words. The smaller you can make them, the better. If you can add pictures, the better. But be looking for feudalism, vassal, feudal contract, fief, aristocrats, knight, chivalry, manor, and serf. And as you go through, so here's a couple of examples. Here's a picture of a knight. Here's a picture of a manor. So that can kind of help you give a visual of what these things look like and what they are. So if we look at feudalism developing, what was the relationship between lords and vassals? It says money on there. There was some money, but really most of the trade that took place was the products that were produced on the land. And so if we look, the king gives land to nobles, nobles give land to knights, knights give land somewhat to protection or to peasants as well as protection. And in return, the peasants give food and service, knights give protection and military service, as well as the products of the land and fighting. So the reason why this whole system begins is these series of invasions, these waves of invaders that we talked about. Kings and emperors were just too weak and powerless to be able to do anything about it. They couldn't fight off these invasions, they couldn't keep law and order, and as a result, to protect people and to bring some stability, individual people found a way to do it themselves, and that's why this system of feudalism developed. And it is one of mutual obligation. And so usually there was some kind of a contract, and usually it was a symbolic contract. So for example, the lord would give a clod of earth to his lesser lord. The lesser lord might kneel down and kiss his feet or his hand, and that is kind of this handshake that they're going to work together. So there's things that the lord promises for the vassals, and there's things that the vassals promise to the lords. It's a very structured society. Really, things come down to being one of three groups: those who fight, those who pray, those who work. So aristocrats, monarchs, knights, those are all fighters. And then you also have the clergy who are praying, and remember this is the age of faith. And then at the bottom you see the workers, who are the peasants or serfs. So if we look at the world of knights and nobles, how is warfare central to life in the Middle Ages? Well, this is a system of protection. Feudalism is about protecting people. And so for knights, they begin training at a very young age, and they would do most of the fighting on horseback. There were foot soldiers who also were used in warfare, and they had a whole different system and set of equipment that they needed. But knights, it cost quite a bit to be able to have all the swords and axes and armor and shields, and also to protect your horse and have multiple horses. And that's why they needed land to be able to do this. And there would be tournaments where they would have mock battles, and it was quite a bit like a scrimmage where they get to practice their skills and show off their skills. Also critical to feudalism are castles and defenses. Again, this is a defensive system, and so you needed a way to protect your people, and that's what castles served. And so if you think in terms of Lord of the Rings and the invasion of Helm's Deep, which is the bottom picture there, that's kind of what it is. It's to keep people safe. If we look at noble women, there's an awful lot of restrictions, and they do have some power. They're in charge of making sure everything is running at home while their husbands are really limited, and we read that also when we talked about religion and how women's rights were limited. They were sent off and to be trained how to be a good and dutiful wife. There are some examples of women during this period who kind of go outside of the norm, and that would be Eleanor of Aquitaine. And so there's a nice little sidebar about her and kind of how she used her position in her multiple marriages to try and help her family get a step up. So chivalry develops. Chival comes from the word horse, and so this chivalry is this expectation that knights have certain characteristics. They're brave, they're loyal, true to their word, they fight fair, protect the weak. One of the problems with this is it kind of places women on a pedestal, which in some ways even limits their rights more, because people seem to think that women are too dainty to be able to do some things, and so it leads to these stereotypes of women that kind of can persist, to be honest, to this day a little bit. So manors are the other part. They're the economic part of feudalism. And how did the manor system work? So the lord took all of his land, his estate, and it usually included one or more villages, and these villages were pretty self-sufficient. Most people were peasants, 80% roughly, and some of those were serfs that were bound to the land, which meant they couldn't leave, but they also couldn't be kicked off. So this is also a system of mutual obligation. The peasants give the lord work several days a week. They fix whatever need to be fixed around the manor, whether it be bridges, fences, or roads. They also were limited in how much power they had. They had to ask permission to get married. And they kind of paid their way by giving products of the land. So like 6 out of 10 hogs would go to the lord. 1/10 of what they would produce went to the church. If you wanted to use the Lord's mill, you had to pay it with so many sacks of grain. And so there was a price to be paid for living, although you did get protection out of the deal. In return, they got the right to farm some of the land for themselves. Again, protection is the key thing. And the fact that they couldn't be forced off the land was another bonus. It's a self-sufficient world. Everything they needed was on this. So here would be an example of a medieval manor. They would have orchards, they would have gardens, they would usually have a stream where they could maybe get some fish. They would have a grain mill, they would have an oven. So they had really everything that they needed to be able to. And so these strips of fields, some of these would be fallow, meaning they wouldn't be planted, and each strip would belong to a different person, and some of these would belong to the lords as well. So if we look at peasant life, life is harsh. They work long hours. They suffer from hunger, disease, cold. Few live beyond the age of 35. Their diet is pretty limited, although it is not all doom and gloom. Much like today, you know, they get together, they celebrate marriages and baptisms and holidays, and that was the price that they paid for. So in summary, think about this question. How did feudalism and the manor economy emerge, and how did it shape medieval life?